So again, welcome today to our session on the features and changes we've made to the ARM software in this past year. So really all of the updates labeled ARM 2025 point something. I think we had 0 all the way up to 2025.5 is what's currently available. We'll go through the different changes that have come through. The first one here, a pretty big change to the trial map. In fact, big enough here that I'm not going to go into too much detail today. We have a whole hour devoted to this topic next week. Next week's webinar, we'll dive into all of the functionality here, but it is a completely brand new trial map tool, specifically bringing that location to life, making your map geolocated or geo-referenced. So instead of kind of the old trial map, you just had your plots drawn on a white sheet of paper, essentially. Instead here now we actually bring the GPS coordinates that you have starting with that lower left coordinate that you put in your site description. We actually map out all of the plots. So all of those plots and boundaries all have their own location. And of course, this opens up the door to a whole host of capabilities. The most basic one here being able to also draw a satellite map, or if you want to bring in your own drone imagery, suddenly now you can have that map with the real life underneath it as well. So you'll find this tool in the window menu of ARM in any trial that you have open. Just under window, there's the Geospatial Trial Map is how you would open this up. So the original old trial map function that is still there and working for now as well. But this is an extra command. Just essentially a sneak preview for what we will be discussing next week. Being able to bring together multiple maps on the same view to have a nice, field view. Essentially, you can make adjustments to the location of the map if you need to get the coordinates even more correct. And I think one of the biggest things is the map can be exported to other systems. So natively, we're working in a shape file is like the equivalent to like an Excel spreadsheet, right? You can just send an Excel spreadsheet to anyone and presumably they can open it and work on it. Same idea here. A shape file is just kind of the standard typical format for any mapping GIS software system. And so being able to take this map that's an ARM and go and inform your drone equipment or your planting equipment or just anything that might want that geolocated information about where the trial is. Question, the GPS coordinates, you only need one coordinate. So in your site description, the the latitude and longitude of your lower left corner. So just two little boxes in your site description. If you have coordinates for those two, ARM then can draw the whole map. So it starts in the lower left corner and it knows also your plot size, right? You have the length and the width of the plot size. If you have buffer, alleyways, things like that, all of those settings that are across the trial all get used to extrapolate from that one coordinate. It creates all of those shapes. And of course, you can see once you get that starting point, you can always start to tweak it. And because it is real life, if you will, you can adjust and move around replicates, or if you have skit plots, things like that. But yeah, good question. That's really all we need to create that. And again, not going to spend too much time on this. but just to note that this does have a little beta tag behind it. So it's not necessarily the final product, still looking for feature ideas, functionality, really kind of keeping our ear to the industry and to people who are using the tool. What else would you want it to do? What else should we be able to do? And so being able to, get any feedback is really, really helpful if you want to send that along once you start to use the function. And again, like we said, the old map not going away. Your existing workflows of how you're used to using the map can still exist, but a lot of capabilities on top of that. And we do have a few tutorial videos for using that tool out on our website. And like we said, also next week we'll be diving in to show some more of the capabilities and things that you can do. So that's kind of our big ticket item, but we've got a few other features we've been adding. Quite a few of them land in the site description section of your trial or protocol. The first one here is the soil properties to measure. So previously there was a little table in the soil section for measured elements, and we've grown that table out and rebranded it to be measured properties. So instead of just strictly elements that are in the soil, there's maybe a variety of other properties that you'd want to record about the soil. And so we brought in things like temperature, moisture, water holding capacity, all sorts of things. Let's just bring them all together, one table that has a lot of different things that you can record, just again, depending on the needs of the trial. So you can see on the right, it's just a snapshot of some of the things in that list. Now, all of the elements, but now a lot of other things as well for what you might want to record. And again, the idea would be this would be for the trial as a whole. Sometimes, if it's really important, part of the study that you might have assessments. If each plot has its own value, then of course you would want to do that in the assessment editor. So this is still focused in the site description, maybe one soil sample for the trial site. This is a great location to put some of this information. And we also added a source field as well. So just a way to document. It's just free text, being able to document the lab, the station, whatever it was that had processed the sample, things like that. Related to that growing table, we added a new workflow for actually recording those different soil properties. The main idea would be, especially if you have a repeat analysis. So maybe I'm going to take a soil sample once a month throughout the season or once every so many weeks. And for each of those samples, I have a collection of items we're wanting to record. So you're going to end up with a lot of different records in that table, right? So we wanted to find a balance and find a way to simplify that process of putting in all of the data. So this is what we came up with, this table for soil properties to record. You can basically queue up the properties and the respective units that will be part of that sample. Or maybe, if you're in the protocol, it's maybe providing the list that should be recorded, whether it's instructions or actually in the trial, what you'll get in each of those analyses that are run. So you fill in this top table here, kind of planning out those entities. Then in the trial, when you actually have a sample that's been processed, there's a button to insert soil records. And this will spin up a wizard that will guide you through putting in that data. So the wizard here on the left, it pops up. It shows that list of all of the properties that you queued up in that table, and you can deselect any of them if you need. But presumably you have the one report that's going to have all of those details on them. So they're all selected. And then just one time you need to fill in the date, the depth, the source, whatever you need to fill in about that report or about that soil analysis. And the benefit then is you're doing it just one time. When you click OK, ARM creates all of those records, one for each property. So trying to save some time, instead of filling in the date 5 different times, filling in the depth 5 different times, only put it in once. ARM then creates all of the different records, one for each different property. Now the only data entry you need to do is, of course, the value itself, right from the analysis. So trying to save some data entry time, and then of course the benefit then is next week or next month when there's another analysis, you can repeat the process. It will add, starting at number 6, just 5 more records, one for magnesium, one for calcium, one for pH, and you'll just repeat that process. So again, hopefully time savers, consistency as well, that you only put things in once, not replicating and accidentally mistyping anything. And I'll go back one slide just to point out again, these are in the trial, the screenshots, but the soil properties to record, it's in the protocol as well. So these can be your instructions of this is what needs to be taken. You could put in the just the property and not the unit for the protocol. You can instruct as far as you need without going overboard, and then that'll be filled in the trial, so that way it's already ready to be used by the trialist for when they're actually taking the samples. So that's the soil properties. One note I think I want to make, just as far as a couple support questions we've had on people using this tool already. There is validation associated with like the property and these units. We have lists for both. So ARM might give you a message if you try to type in a property that isn't in the list. But the reason for that is we want to grow these lists. We want this list of properties. If I go back a couple slides, we want this list to be as comprehensive as we can. So if you have something that you want to document, but it's not in the list, just shoot us an email. Just let us know, hey, I have this entity, and if you just provide us, the shorthand that you would put in the property, but then also if you could give us the description that would go in the list, that would help, so we know the best terminology to use. And we can pretty quick turnaround usually for these types of lists within a day or two to get that item in the list. So and the same thing for the unit. Depending on if it's a property we didn't cover, we might not have what's the appropriate unit as well. So again, just let us know, send us an email or your local representative, and they can send it on to us for those things. Just again, flesh out what ARM can support, even if it's yelling at you that's not right. You can still type it in there, and then, like I said, get a hold of us within a day or two. We can put it in the list. And then you just update your dictionary, and suddenly you won't get an error message or anything. And then we'll have an even more comprehensive list then in the end there for everyone to take advantage of. Okay, so that is the soil. Next topic here is weather stations. And we added another type to our equipment tab. So the relatively new, one of the newer sections in the site description is this equipment. And so we added a type for weather station to be able to document as many details as you'd like about the weather station that may be used in a trial. And I just have an example that I filled out here, the variety of different details that you may have for the equipment. And then alongside that, if you do put that information in your equipment, then on the weather tab, where you have all of the records for the daily weather information, at the top we had the weather station name. I think that was always called the weather station name. Was the field. We added a weather station number in order to link and associate the name of the weather station with what is in the trial on the equipment section. So it kind of fits the mold of some of the other things we've been adding over the last couple of years in different areas of the site description. Instead of replicating this information, creating a bunch more fields on the weather tab for different details about the weather station, let's keep it simple here and just have the name. And we already had this code, so we have that still there on the tab, but we can simply create a reference essentially to all of the details that already are described somewhere else, instead of having multiple locations for the same piece of information. So if you open up the weather station number field, it's going to show you a list, which is essentially just referencing the information on the equipment tab in that same trial. Specifically, it'll only show you the equipment that you have that have weather station as the type. And then that will link up. It'll fill in the name based on the equipment name, and it'll fill in the code based on your serial number, if there's something in there. Otherwise, of course, it'll leave it blank. So again, just one more spot where we're just trying to link, create these linkages, not duplicating information, trying to actually cut down on how much information has to be put in every single trial. Try to streamline it and just link instead. Another function here in the site description, for any table that's in the site description where you can create new rows. We call them repeating sections. The tables that you are creating more rows when you have more repeating sections, you can now sort those repeating sections based on their content. And we're actually, in this case, it actually is rearranging the order in the trial. We're not like a temporary view, actually rearranging in memory how they are ordered. So a few different examples. The one here in the screenshot that I chose to do was use the maintenance tab. And that was one of the ideas in the request, was sometimes the trialist puts in the maintenance products. Don't know if they do it alphabetically or just whenever they think of putting it in, you end up with a kind of an unusual order that's definitely not chronological for whatever reason. In the end, it would be nice if I could arrange them chronologically to see the timing of when those products were applied. Now all I have to do is right click in the date column. So do make sure to choose the column whose information you want to sort by, and right click, and then there's a sort ascending or sort descending. And again, ARM then rearranges. So you can see here we had kind of a mismatch of the order there chronologically, and so I sorted so that way I have them based on when they actually occurred. This also applies kind of a couple of different tables throughout your site description or protocol description that I think would be most impactful, most useful perhaps for this function. Your trial location table in the protocol when you're planning out the trials, being able to sort by really any column in that table, the weather or your controlled environment. There's a lot of records there, but if for some reason they were put in an unusual order, being able to sort would be pretty nice. And then of course the maintenance section that we demonstrated here are all, like I said, I think examples that would make sense. There might be a few other smaller tables that, again, if you're able to add rows to them, that's where this change applies. Any of the tables where you create new columns, we don't quite have that capability yet. Usually a little bit different type of information anyway, where sorting maybe doesn't make as much sense. This change here was to the capability of ARM to remember a default value. We had kind of a rash of support issues where people were finding information that they didn't want or kind of appearing in some of their trials. And we finally were able to track it back to, oh, somehow there was a default value that got set for that field. And so the theory at least was, well, let's make it a little harder to set a default, because the best guess was that those defaults were set by accident. Well, at least the user doesn't remember creating a default for that field. It wouldn't have made much sense. So what we did in response was just simply created a second layer to the right-click menu. So that way, instead of just being able to right-click and accidentally choosing set as default, now you first click on default entry, and then you would go over to set as default. So hopefully makes it a little more intentional, still easy to find. Hopefully that you can go and manipulate the default entry, but not going to be something that just accidentally gets clicked and then messes people up moving forward. Because it is pretty nice feature when you're strategizing something like your country. If you only work at one particular trial site, like those location details, really easy just to set as default, because every study I work on is going to have that same information. It's really nice just to cut down on data entry. The other addition here, since we made this menu item, also put in a command for clear default. So that way it's a little easier. If there is a default in place for a field, you can clear it out very simply. The old way, you'd have to delete out what was in that box and then right click and set as default to basically set nothing as the default, which wouldn't be very, very clear, I don't think. Logical after you say it out loud, but certainly not something I think people would know off the top of their heads. So hopefully just easier working with these default values then. Another type of default here that we worked on would be kind of across a lot of different sections of your site description. There's a variety of different fields for the height or the length or moisture of all sorts of different objects. But they're all kind of they have this similar data type. There's a similar behind the scenes functionality of those types of lists. And what we did here is just try to improve the logic for ARM to default filling in some of those units. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide because it's kind of hard to just talk this out as in paragraph form, a lot easier to demonstrate with an example. So I've got on the screen here, let's just say we're hand typing some basic weather details, the precipitation and the irrigation amount for a couple of dates, trying to demonstrate the defaulting that ARM can do. So the first thing it would check is if you have a linked field, which we've kind of identified behind the scenes as being very related to one another. In this case, precipitation, irrigation. We're making the assumption that in most cases, you're going to be using the same unit of measure because they're very tied together, because combined, there's a total moisture amount that you might care about. So we know inherently these two, precipitation and irrigation, are very much linked. So in that example, if I typed in 15 millimeters in the precipitation, then when I come over and put in a 10 to the irrigation, ARM will automatically fill in millimeters because precipitation I just filled in that same row. So that's kind of the first layer of defaulting that I don't even have to type in that unit since I just did in the precipitation. Now, of course, if for some reason I did need a different unit, I can change it. This is simply the defaulting kind of an autofill that ARM does, just to, again, speeding up data entry. The second example, so kind of the second layer, if you're not in a linked field, ARM can also consider if you're in a repeating section, what did you fill in last time? So in this case, if I'm in row number 2 and putting in irrigation or putting in precipitation, it can default to millimeters because the last record I just filled in, I already have a unit. So I'll just fill in that very same unit. Since I'm in the same table, presumably you'd be using the same unit of measure just on the next day. So it can default across the repeating section. If you don't have either of those, there still is that set as default from the right-click menu. So that's not going away. That's always still an option. And then finally, if that isn't the case, for some of these types of fields, there is still the decision, the choice in your trial of metric units or the US standard or imperial units. So we can also default to that. Again, specific to these height, length, and moisture fields. Those are the only ones we're really referring to because there's a very small number of options, right? You know, inches or centimeters, feet, or it's, you know, just a few of them. So again, this is one of those where it probably took longer to talk through it and explain it than the real impact is just going to save you tiny bits of time over the course of using ARM. And you maybe wouldn't have even noticed it if we didn't point it out, but that'd be the goal for some of those defaults, is to be kind of silently saving you time. Next new function is in the crop description. We added a pick list for saving your crop varieties. So kind of the combination of the crop, the EPO code that you choose from the list and the variety field that you can then enter in. Oops. So previously, you've got the full list of crops, from EPO, and there's a favorites list to simplify that. but there wasn't any way to save your varieties. So here we've kind of combined the two, and it's accessible with this button right above the crop. So to fill this in, fill out your crop, choose your code, any of these fields. So we tried to find any of the fields that would be related to your variety. So maturity group, seed size, perennial age, things like that. All of those are in this list. So fill out whatever might apply that you'd want to save for this particular variety, and then go back and press that button, the crop variety, and it'll pop open the list and ask you if you want to add it to your list. And I use the term pick list because that's the type of list in ARM that is empty or mostly empty when you start. And it's just something just you would fill in. We don't have any dictionary where there's kind of a master set of items. You just start filling in with whatever you would want. Heading back to the maintenance section of a trial, we added the ability to document the crop stage at the time of that maintenance application. So new field crop stage majority, much like we have, majority at application, at assessment, same type of idea. Of course, if we add the crop stage majority, we do also need to first reference what crop. So we need this linkage to the crop entity that's already in the trial. So before you put in the stage, you do have to pop open the crop ID. And again, oops. Again, it'll only show what is in that current trial, and you can choose which crop. And then that way we know what stage scale, for example, that you're using for that crop. It's one of the reasons why we kind of have to have that linkage first. Even if you always have just one crop, you still kind of need that linkage there. Pretty small change here, but just a little visual cue on the pest stage at application and also the crop stage at application. Those sections are a little more involved than the other tables in the trial, because you really have two levels of repeating sections. You've got separate columns for your applications, and then within that, you also might have multiple pests or multiple crops if you're on the crop stage at application. And then you've got multiple things you can record for each of those pests. So we just added these a little bit thicker line to separate each of those pests, to just try to make it a little more clear what you're looking at and how the data is structured, specifically on those two sections. So hopefully just making it easier to read, easier to not lose your place when you're trying to enter in the data, separating out those different pests or crops. Back on the soil section of a trial, we added one field to the, let's call it the general soil description, kind of at the top of the page, being able to document the date for the whatever soil sample is related to these information, right? Your sand, silt, clay, those different pieces up at the top there. So just depending on your site type, maybe had been some time since you maybe don't do or take that sample that often, being able to just have a note of how long ago that took place when it was reported. It's kind of the use for that value there. Let's see, I had a question here. We'll go back a section. Could ARM check if the stages at application, like we have here on the screen, are different from what is entered in the assessment header? I don't think we do that currently, but that is an interesting idea for validation. It's definitely one of those, it's one of the troubles with how ARM is structured currently, is we have all these different places to put in stage details, stage at the applicate, the pest stage at application, pest stage at assessment. Now at maintenance, we got all these different sections, and yeah, that opens yourself up to um, something being put in wrong or inconsistent or not in the right spot. So I think if I'm understanding, yeah, the idea would be, can we cross-reference a little bit? So if you had an assessment at 0 days after application A, so really an assessment on the same day as this application, could we kind of cross-reference to make sure that though the stage majority put in here is the same as what's on the assessment? Which, yeah, I think that would be pretty valuable. We'll kind of jot that down um, for our programmers to kind of look into what that would take. But it makes a lot of sense that would be something that would be a little hard for a person to check, right? You got to skip between multiple sections. So I can imagine that that's a little bit of a challenge for a human to spot, or if they'd have to kind of manually check it versus great then for the software tool to be able to do. So yeah, just kind of cross-referencing the stage information from your assessment and the application. We just said we also really would also probably loop that into the maintenance too, although maybe a little less common that you would be doing a maintenance spray the same day as a real application, if you will. But you never know, right? Great suggestion. I like that. I like that idea. Like I said, pretty confident ARM does not currently do that, but real good idea for the future. All right, last topic within the site description bucket is the climate zone. Pretty specific here to the EU, but ARM can autofill the climate zone based on when you enter in your country. So for most EU countries, it's a one-to-one mapping based on your country. We know exactly what the climate zone is. So we might as well autofill that value, so that way it's recorded. It's really important for most studies to know the correct climate zone that you're in. Of course, the devil's in the details. Some countries, it's not that simple. Depending on where you are at within that country, you might have a slightly different climate zone. So for those, I think Croatia and France were the two identified as such. So then ARM won't autofill, at least until you put in your state or your province or your county. So again, just trying to make ARM a little smarter, autofilling things when it's kind of a guarantee that ARM can know that information. And of course, just trying to keep it up to date with the matching what the climate zone definitions are and finding those little subtle tricks of when your country isn't quite that homogeneous as far as climate zone goes. And the one caveat here at the bottom, if your site type in this study is one of the controlled environments, if you're doing a greenhouse, if you're doing a controlled environment study, the climate zone doesn't matter, right? You're controlling the climate, so that is irrelevant where that controlled environment is at. Is you've got it controlled. So ARM won't autofill based on location. In fact, it'll autofill NA instead to say, hey, I know this site type, I know this study is already controlling the environment. We don't care about the climate zone. In fact, we'll make sure to put NA so that way, database systems or summaries later on won't accidentally pull in this trial with a group that's similarly located, knowing that they're fundamentally different, right? All right, next category here, study rules. Oops, I skipped way ahead. Let me close and start it again. My presentation here today has been really touchy. I've been skipping ahead all the time. How did I go all the way to the end? All right, start from study rules. There we go. This is probably the one of the top three kind of biggest features we added here. We've seen the soil section and the geospatial map. This would be the other kind of large feature to talk through. The ability here we added to track changes to study rules. So within the study rules editor, there's a new checkbox on that properties panel that you can turn on the ability to log all of the changes that are made to the list of study rules in a trial. Primarily, of course, if you're making changes, it would be to delete a rule or if you downgraded it, right? If you went from required and then brought it down to recommended. If you make one of those two changes, there'll be this prompt that pops up. Kind of similar to the audit, audit log related to like GEP, where you can like lock down a trial and any change has to be logged. Similar idea here that this pop-up appears when you make a change asking for a reason. So here, and it shows study rule number 1, I tried to delete. And it lists out, I was deleting this strict validation study rule from the trial, and I need to specify a reason why I'm making that change. Then I can click OK, and the change is made. You enter in the reason, and when you proceed, then ARM takes that information and logs it as a note in the trial. So we aren't using the audit log, that kind of a separate capability. Here we're just putting it in the notes section of the trial. And there's specifically a specific context for tracking rules, and then it puts in who made the change at what time. And here's what happened. We deleted this study rule, and the reason I gave was it was unnecessary. And so it logs all of that information of what the rule was, what happened, what was the reason given. That is, as a note, if you do need to mark it as a deviation, we try to make it easy to be able to do that as well. We didn't want to automatically make a deviation because depending on what the change is, it's maybe not a big enough issue to put in a deviation. So it's kind of up to the user. But if you just right click on that note, there's a special item to promote that note to be a deviation. And essentially ARM just takes all of those bits of information that was logged and creates a new record in the deviation section. Again, date, the person, what they did, and the reason. Kind of autofills for you then to be able to document that change as a deviation, again, only if it's necessary. The keys here on how this works, only the protocol owner can turn this tracking on or off. So that way, really putting this capability on the sponsor only if you're working across companies, because it's contracted research. Of course, if it's in-house, then usually they're pretty much the same entity oftentimes. If you are the protocol owner and you make a change to a rule after you've turned that on, that prompt that comes up about changing, deleting the rule, there'll be a button to say, do not track this particular change. So again, the idea is, as the sponsor, as a protocol owner, I want to be able to keep track of changes to the rules that, not that I make personally, because I know when I'm making them, but to everyone else. Especially valuable again to that trialist, so I know what the trialist might have to manipulate. Of course, overarching on all of this, we aren't changing the permissions capability of the study rule. So that core functionality of your rules, where you, as the person creating the rule, gets to decide who's allowed to change it, that all is still in place. So if you lock it down so a trialist cannot change a rule, then this whole tracking isn't needed, right? Or it wouldn't really apply to you because you're not allowing anyone else to change those rules anyway. So we're not affecting that capability at all. If you've loosened the permission some so others can change the rules, then you would be able to track the changes to the rules. In fact, that maybe goes hand in hand, right? This might give you the capability to loosen up those permissions a little, knowing that any changes are logged. So I still have that knowledge of what requirements, really those study rules are often kind of your list of requirements for a study, knowing which of those got loosened or removed and why. And just real quick, reasons why this functionality might be of use. It's not required, of course. It's all up to the sponsor, the protocol writer. But if you want to have a prompting to record or document the reasons why things couldn't be followed from the standard rules, hey, there might be these very good reasons why we can't fill in this information. Just let us know, right? So being able to have that type of communication, I think is useful. Also, it could give you an indication, is the trial still valid, right? If I'm getting, periodic updates from my trialist and I can see that some of these really critical rules had to be removed, that's maybe a cue that, wait a minute, I don't think we can, really get to the original objectives of this trial. But maybe it's early enough in the season, we could still repurpose this trial for something else, right? Something's went wrong, but we'd still have time to make a quick action. And then finally, being able to gather feedback for future study rule sets, right? So if as a sponsor company, we really have worked hard to create this list of rules and requirements, being able to collect feedback where there are those gotchas, those times where in a particular trial, this happened and we didn't foresee it, so we had to remove the rule. Being able to have all of this logged so that way in the off season we can diagnose and decide, okay, well, look at that. 20% of the time this one rule had to be adjusted. How about next year we just get rid of that one? Or, be able to just update your rule sets. Really nice, I think, powerful tool for the QA groups, the standardization groups in those sponsor companies. All right, kind of rapid fire through these last few. One more change in the study rules area, specifically for the consistent entries study rules. There's the consistent entries across rating timing and consistent entries across SE name. Those two are related to the assessment editor. We just added the capability to control whether that rule applies to both the trial and the protocol, or you could specify only the protocol or only the trial. So previously, it always did both. And the request was the sponsor was setting up a bunch of assessment columns in the protocol and found that this study rule was useful because it kind of auto fills whichever field that you choose based on, again, that rating timing or your SE. So it was really useful for the protocol writer to kind of schedule everything in and autofill some things. But they didn't want that to happen on the trialist side for those particular fields because just because it was the plan, doesn't mean they needed that to be taking place in the trial because it could be different in the trial, and they didn't want it to cause problems as the trialist wouldn't be able to document the differences because that rule was taking place. So that group, they were turning on protocol only. Same thing could happen vice versa, right? Where you don't want this validation to be happening in the protocol, but you do want it to happen in the trial. Now you have that capability. It's just turning on the little conditional flag when you have, again, just the consistent entries across rating timing or SE, just that specific rule. There's this toggle. In the labels capability, we've got the raw data labels, so you can generate your own custom labels from ARM. We added the couple new fields. First one was cooperator trial ID. So, if the sponsor kind of already has their trial ID in, um, the trialist might want their own ID on those labels. So we added the cooperator trial ID as well into the label functionality, of course, so that way the trialist identifier is available to be put on a label. We also added the risk phrase and the safety phrase from the treatments editor into that label capability. If you're doing treatment labels, pretty straightforward. If you need to communicate the information for those dangerous substances, safety advice, pretty clear the value there that you would want to add to those labels. In the attachments section, added a little more checking. So real briefly, when you open a trial that has files attached, ARM remembers the file location. It knows the path to where that attachment was at. If the path has changed or if this file was sent to someone else's computer, ARM will attempt to find the new location of that file. It, of course, can't scan your whole computer. That could take an hour. So there's kind of specific things it looks for. And we added one more thing that it looks for to its arsenal. So ARM will look both in the folder where your trial is at. It now also looks to see if you have a folder that's named your trial ID that has all of the files in it. ARM will see, hey, if I can find those attachments in this subfolder, I can kind of reconnect all those files. So again, it's just another option if you don't want to put, plot photos as a good example where you just end up with dozens of these attachments. If you want to create a separate folder, just use the trial ID and then put all those attachments in there. The ARM will be able to find it. The login screen, we just updated the look and feel of the login prompt, and hopefully help give a couple of resources. The little question mark in the corner opens up ARM help, and then troubleshooting options as well. So if you're having problems, if you get some weird error when you try to log in or ARM doesn't open, there's like a detect and repair and things like that in that troubleshoot button to try to help get things up and running again. One small change in the assessment editor, specifically in the action codes list. We added an action code so you can mark columns to not be exported with the ARM mobile connection or the EDC connection. So the example given was maybe I've got a bunch of soil sample ratings that those go to, go to the lab. So they would never be something I want in my mobile app with my data collection. So instead of those assessments just kind of taking up space on the screen, I can exclude them from the export. So that way I don't see them in my mobile app. A couple more changes related to the ARM mobile capability. When you're setting up the connection, there is specifically for ARM mobile, and then there's also an option called compatible app if there's any other apps out there that use the same connection. And there's a few different ones out there currently, and hopefully that list will continue to grow. The change here this year was so that you can have two separate paths. Previously, it was always the same one in memory. You couldn't pick two different locations. So now if you are using ARM Mobile for some assessments, and then maybe you're using one of those other applications for different types of assessments or different types of trials, you can set up two different folder paths, work with those two different applications without having to constantly be changing those paths. Similarly, if you work with the Harvest Master software called Mirrors, we have a built-in connection there. Previously, it was hard-coded to specific folders that Mirrors would use, but it's not always the same computer where ARM and Mirrors is at. So we just added an explicit path that you can choose if you wish, so you don't have to use the default path. Maybe throw it on Dropbox or OneDrive so that way your tablet that goes in the Combine can access that same folder and you don't have to manually transfer the files. Real quick, as we're running out of time, a few ARM mobile app updates as well. Go through these pretty quickly. Try to work on some subsample workflows. The first one is adding a sound after so many ratings. So you can specify here, the screenshot I had 10. After 10 values that I enter, it makes a little ding to remind me, hey, you should stop or change what you're doing type of thing. So that's useful if I'm doing like half of the plot, and we'll see an example where this kind of came from. And a lot of these are related to it. And if you're moving to a new plot, as you're navigating, go to the next plot. Or if I had to go to my last plot, the focus will go down to the first rating that doesn't have a value in it to try to pick back up where I left off, essentially. And we also added a reverse direction. So if you're going through your walkthrough and then all of a sudden you need to turn around and do the plots you just were at, this reverses the direction. And here's my little visualization. The use case where this came from was in some vineyard research. There's no spaces in between the plots, so you have to go all the way down and only do half of the subsamples because I can only look at half of the plot at one time. So I do half of my subsamples for each plot. Then I flip around when I get to the end and I go back really in that same plot, just in reverse to do the other half of my subsamples. And so all of those features I just rattled off kind of all tie together into making that workflow work. So when I get to the end here, I've went 101, 102, down to 108, then I'm going to flip around and I'm actually going to do 108, 107. I'm going to work my way backwards, just the other half of my subsamples. So kind of a unique situation, just adding the capabilities to be able to support that type of subsampling. And we made sure after some feedback, realizing that you don't want to accidentally click that reverse direction when you don't mean to. So we added in a prompt that if you do click that button, it asks to confirm before it changes up your order. Since it's not super you'd only reverse directions every few times. It wasn't really onerous on the people actually using it, and then was very useful for people who didn't mean to click that button to not accidentally change things up. And last but not least, we also integrated the lower left corner GPS coordinates. Within the mobile app, there's the button to pin trial location. So if you want to use your device's GPS coordinates, at the moment, if you go and stand in the lower left corner of your plot with your device, you click on pin trial location. Your device's location is remembered as the corner. Now, that information is included when you export data, and ARM will prompt you then. It will bring in those coordinates. If you already had lower left coordinates in that trial, there'll be this prompt. ARM will say, look, currently you had this as your lower left. This is what you got from ARM Mobile. Which one do you want to save in this trial? So that way you don't accidentally replace your coordinates if you didn't intend to. And that's the list. Sorry, I ran a little over time. As promised, I always get a little little chatty. But those are the new features and functions in ARM. Like I said, if you do end up with questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we can help you get going on another year of ARM, hopefully. So thanks everyone for your time.